Support for the CivicSciTV network comes from readers, listeners, and viewers like you, and organizations such as the New York City Economic Development Corporation that works with local communities to create dynamic and accessible neighborhoods across New York City. Explore the network by visiting CivicSciTV.org.
Mapping the global landscape of civic science by dissecting new insights from researchers, practitioners, and leaders in academia, government, for-profit, and nonprofit organizations. This is Questions of the Day with Fanuel Muindi.
Previously on Questions of the Day.
The life science or like the sciences, because it just feels that if you're not going to build a career out of it, there's no necessity to like learn anything. But that's not what Gen Space is about. You don't necessarily have to build a career out of it if you're just like really a tinkerer.
So curiosity almost.
Yeah, curiosity sparks this place.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about what science are they able to actually do here?
Yeah, so our programming falls into four main buckets. So we have public programs, which are often free or low cost and open to everyone. Well, everything we do is open to everyone. We have a membership program, so folks, like Vanessa said, can come and join a community project, which is community projects have some kind of common goal and common interest, and then over time, the group as a whole brings all of their skills and interests to the table to accomplish different things. So we
Today, Fanuel Muindi travels to Washington, D.C. to meet with Jenny Luray, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Public Engagement at Research America, which is an alliance that advocates for science, discovery, and innovation to achieve better health for all. Reflecting on her work, Jenny says, "Too many Americans are unfamiliar with what scientists do, and that has enormous implications." The conversation dives into Research America's civic science portfolio, with a spotlight on their Civic Engagement Microgrant Program, which since 2018 has been providing funding to support STEM groups led by master's, PhD, postdoc, and professional students to design and execute projects that create dialogue with public officials, local community leaders, and the public around issues of common concern.
Jenny Luray, thank you so much for doing this.
I am delighted, Fanuel.
So when you talk to people about Research America, especially those who don't know what the organization does, what do you tell them?
There's a long and short answer. I'll start with the short. So the short is that we are an alliance of over 300 universities, patient advocacy groups, industry, and science societies, private research institutions as well. But our goal is to strengthen federal funding and federal policies for medical and health research.
Okay. And then when you think about who are the members of the organization, maybe someone is thinking, can I as an individual be a member, or is it an organization that has to be?
An organization, we don't have individual memberships, but there are ways that individuals can get involved. For example, we have a weekly newsletter that goes out that our CEO sends out. We have over close to 4,000 readers. So individuals can participate in that way. And often we have calls to action in that newsletter. So we'll let people know, like, hey, the Appropriations Committee is, working on NIH funding levels right now. Please contact your member of Congress. So we always provide individual, opportunities for individuals to take action.
Yeah. Now I know there's a big portfolio of work that
Yes.
Research America does.
Yes.
What comes to mind as you think about that portfolio?
While strengthening federal support for medical and health research is at the core, we've really gotten into some very important new areas that, in a sense, all come back to really public support for research. That's who funds. It's taxpayers. It's the public. Who's responsible for so much of our research funding, right? And so we have been increasingly concerned about how does the public perceive the scientific community. Clearly, the COVID experience highlighted some, let's just say, some areas where the scientific community needs to needs to work on. And we don't need to go into that now. We can do a separate conversation about that. But people have thrown out the phrase trust in science, trust in science. Well, we can debate whether or not trust is the right word, or strengthening the relationship between non-scientists and scientists. But the bottom line is that too many Americans are just completely unfamiliar with what scientists do. And that has enormous implications. It has implications for who goes into science. If you've never met a scientist, would you consider that a career, right? If you've never met a scientist, why would you believe what a scientist says? If you've never met a scientist, that's going to impact your understanding of scientists, of what science is too, right? Hypothesis testing,
right?
Evidence, etc. So we have been doing a lot of work in terms of providing opportunities for scientists to engage with the public. So we have always, I mentioned that how individuals can engage with the Research America. So, we've done, hundreds and hundreds of talks at universities over our, 30-year plus existence, talking about ways that researchers can engage, particularly around public policy. So we've been doing that since day one. I think where we've expanded is talking about how scientists can engage with non-scientists who are not policymakers, but are members of their community. And so that's where the Microgrant program comes in.
Yeah. And of course, Research America also does these surveys as well, right? Where you were mentioning earlier about the public, knowing who, you know a scientist, for example, right? And that's such an important aspect of what you do, right? Can you put those in context?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Fanuel. Thank you so much, because it is our survey work that has also led to more of this, public-facing work of scientists. So we do public opinion surveys. We do a general survey every January, and then we work with a lot of partner groups, like the Dana Foundation. We did a survey on neuroscience. We did a survey with Virginia Tech on how Virginians look at research. But our January survey, which we call our omnibus survey, we always ask about public support for science. And we also ask about public expectations. The public, regardless of party affiliation, expects scientists to share their research with the public. They want to know what scientists are working on. But there's another survey question that runs counter to that. So when we ask whether or not you can name a living scientist, only a third of Americans can name a living scientist. In past years, it's been a quarter of Americans. It kind of dropped up to 30, maybe largely because of Tony Fauci. But that's not good, right? And so there's a visibility issue. We're also seeing that, particularly folks without a college degree, they're less likely to see the benefits of science impacting their lives or the lives of the people they know. Again, something that we've got to work on.
So this all builds towards the civic science portfolio that Research America has, right?
Yes.
And at the center of it, at least the way I see it, is the Microgrant program. So tell us about that. What is this program for someone who doesn't know anything about it?
Oh, yeah, sure. So for the past, I think we're on our 7th year, we fund groups of early career scientists, as well as folks in professional schools studying, STEM-related topics, pharmacy, medicine, nursing, etc. We provide grants to do various types of community engagement projects. And they have to be student-developed, student-run, student-led. we have focused on graduate students and postdocs. So that's the pool that we've targeted. We have funded well over 100 projects around the country in probably 40 states. Every year we get to check off another new state.
There's actually a report on your website,
yes,
right?
Yes, has all the states. Yay, we got Oklahoma. We have learned so much from that program. Both good and bad. I mean, when I say bad, I mean some of the limitations that scientists face when they're trying to do community engagement, the pushback, that they can get from their PIs. Not to blame the PIs are responding to the incentive structure right now, right, within academia, which is right now doesn't lend itself to spending much time on civic science or public engagement. But we've also learned how many different ways there are to incorporate the public into your work. And someone once said to me, well, wait a minute, scientists are the public too. So I will often say scientists and non-scientists instead of scientists and the public. But we've had just an incredible range of really creative undertakings.
And that's the core of the program, right? Is this catalytic, right? You're trying to catalyze program development in this space.
Yes.
And can you share some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So they're microgrants, they're small grants, they're, between $1,000 and $4,000. And they go for expenses, paying for honorarium, paying for transportation, planning for meals. Food's always a good way to, to attract people to an event, right? So I can give you some examples. So I think it was 2 years ago, we funded a group called Science Unlocked. And these are grad students who are participants in the NIH OxCam Scholars Program. And they worked with young people who were in a juvenile facility. And they worked with the teaching staff to incorporate science engagement in the students' learning. I mean, really, really exciting stuff. Another example is a group in Oklahoma organized an Ask a Scientist. And that's something that is actually, I think a lot of graduate student groups could do in really every community. The woman who started this program describes an experience she had while finishing her PhD, she was in a supermarket, and the cashier was about her age, and just said, so what do you do? And she said, I'm a scientist. And the cashier said, wow, I've never met a scientist. And this woman was also first generation to go to college in her family. And it just sparked this idea like, wow, we have got to get scientists out in the community. So she got a group of graduate students together and some of the faculty, and she tapped them to go to a big fair that's held on weekends. It's sort of like a farmer's market type thing. And it brings together lots of different folks from different backgrounds. And they set up a booth, and it just said, Ask a Scientist. One of the things that was interesting is some of the faculty were a little nervous about it. They were used to academic discussions where you have to respond to very, very detailed questions. And they said, well, what if we can't answer a question? And she said, you will be able to answer the question. This is not about providing facts. This is about connecting, right? This is about connecting. This is about showing that scientists are human. And you can do it. And they all had a fabulous time. So, you can do an Ask a Scientist in any community, right?
Right.
There's always public opportunities for that type. So those are just two of many examples.
And there are many examples. Recent recipients of funding have included projects such as the Brain Awareness Week Open House, organized by the Neuroscience Community Outreach Group at the University of Washington, the Scientists for Migrant Learning and Education project by the Mentorship Opportunities for Research Engagement Group at Northwestern University, and the Science Fair with a twist hosted by the Science Policy Network Detroit at Wayne State University, which brought researchers and high school students together in a reverse science fair, where students served as judges. Here is Katie Dwyer from the Science Policy Network Detroit describing their project.
My name is Katie. I am here with Science Policy Network Detroit. We are homed in Detroit, Michigan, center of Detroit, and affiliated with Wayne State University. And the premise of our activity was to invite local scholars, students that are undergoing research at our university, graduate students, faculty, to come and participate in a science fair. But as I mentioned, this was a science fair with a twist. So the faculty, the researchers, the graduate students were all kind of charged to see whether or not they could demonstrate their science to a group of local high school students in a fun, interactive, and engaging way. So we invited people from different disciplines to demonstrate their science, and we also invited a nearby local high school, a set of STEM interested students to Wayne State's campus, where they could actively go around and engage in this science fair with a twist. And the twist was that they themselves were actually serving as the judges for the science fair.
Don't go away. The conversation continues after this short break.
The newly released SciPep report, a collaborative effort by the Kavli Foundation and the Department of Energy's Office of Science, provides targeted insights for communicating basic science, curiosity-driven research that is often less familiar or immediately relatable to audiences. As the report introduction explains, the motivation behind SciPep emerged from a lack of existing guidance tailored to sharing foundational science with the public. Unlike applied science, which has an established communication framework, basic science faces unique challenges in conveying its broader value to society. The report includes a broad spectrum of resources, drawing on expert discussions, commissioned research, and survey data. For example, one study cited in the report, led by John Besley of Michigan State, reviewed 2,300 articles from top science communication journals. This analysis found that only about 5% addressed communicating basic science topics. SciPep's recommendations seek to address these gaps by suggesting practical, evidence-based approaches. Central to SciPep's framework is the importance of setting clear, audience-specific goals in public communication. John Besley explains that every other decision about communication follows from these audience-specific behavioral goals, emphasizing the need for targeted objectives before selecting tactics. Social scientist Rose Hendricks adds that communicators of basic science may sometimes set unrealistic goals that are not connected with their chosen tactics. Olivia Ambrogio from the American Geophysical Union's Sharing Science program notes that people focused on basic research tend to interact with non-scientists less than their applied counterparts. Prior experience engaging with audiences enhances researchers' ability to reflect on what worked and what didn't. Historian Bruce Lewinstein provides a thought-provoking perspective, stating, "As a historian, I know that the label of basic science, and the contrast with applied science, does not describe a real distinction in science. Instead, the labels appeared in history primarily for rhetorical reasons, as part of an argument about how to treat science." His reflection in the report, titled "Why I Don't Use the Label Basic Science," challenges the traditional terminology and is an insightful read. The report has a ton of evidence-backed guidance, and all of it is very accessible alongside informative case studies that tell compelling narratives. And it comes with a slide deck with visuals of the key insights from the report. Not many reports do that. Anyway, the report is out, and time will tell how its recommendations permeate into the landscape of basic science communication. Join us here on the CivicSciTV network via video, digital print, and radio, as we venture to engage with some of the scholars and practitioners who contributed to the report, and also capture insights from users, especially basic scientists and practitioners communicating basic science to understand how they are applying the report's guidance.
Now back to the conversation.
Right now, as we're speaking, there's a current application part just closed, right?
Right.
You're reviewing the new one. Tell us about that, because there's some news about the applicant pool this time,
well,
right?
I mean, it doubled from last year.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
So we got over 100 applications, and we'll be able to fund maybe 25.
Yeah.
So we have.
So what do you attribute to that growth? Is it kind of direction of travel overall, or is there something that you're doing?
I'd like to poll the applicants to find out. I have my theory. It was an election year, right? So there was a lot of attention to, election years get people to think about their surrounding communities, right? And what's at stake. And so I think that was a factor. And I think that also this movement has built such that more people are familiar kind of with this sort of catalytic funding and this concept. But I really do think the election had something to do with it,
And we were talking offline earlier. You mentioned the election and the surrounding, sort of what's happening. That it is grassroots, right? A lot of it is grassroots, and there's a movement. You use the word movement, right? Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Sure.
That direction of travel. Where are we headed then? As we activate more and younger scientists, right, that are trying to do this work.
I really do think it's a movement. Now, it's been fueled in part by foundations.
Sure.
The Rita Allen Foundation, for example, Elizabeth Christopherson, the Civic Science Fellows program that she created. She has, really been a leader. So has the Kavli Foundation, Simon, Sloan, there's so many, the Lasker Foundation. So it's really the foundations that have helped to nurture this movement. You often talk about like a theory of change. What's your theory of change?
Right.
Which is such an important question before you start any venture. And, I think our theory of change here is that let's get a lot of experience, on the books. So what are the barriers? What works? What doesn't work? What skills do graduate students need? So what do they need to know before they're engaging with the community, right? So the skill building is also something that we're very focused on, and we provide them with some training around how to communicate, particularly sort of bilateral communication.
And I will add that this is a 1 year long.
Yeah, it's a 1 year long.
Yeah, so it's not like you're giving them the money, off you go, see you later. No, it's like you're with us, you're part of this.
We do a lot of mentoring. We have, regular Zoom calls and with folks so they can exchange information. They're kind of becoming part of a cohort, right? So while the grassroots is key, we also need institutional change. And that's something that you and I have worked on in the public engagement working group that we helped to staff, that was co-chaired by Alan Leschner and Keith Yamamoto. And that was really focused on what are some of the institutional levers that need to be pulled in terms of universities, government, and foundations that can really make public engagement, civic science, a normative undertaking within the academic science community.
And that is part of your theory of change, right? Within the Research America portfolio of work, right? Empowering these scientists, right, across the spectrum to get involved in institutionalizing some of this work that is taking place. So you mentioned the working group. So you and I, yes, had a pleasure of working with a phenomenal group of individuals, right, that came up with some, 3 recommendations at the end, but we discussed a whole gamut of things over several months. And I encourage people to just click on the link below to look at that report and actual recommendations. It was structured in 3 layers, right? We had the federal level, you had the philanthropy, and the university level. Just think about it collectively, holistically, Jenny. What is the hope with these recommendations, right? Now, put that in context that there's been movement, right? The direction of travel. You have the PCAST letter that came out as well, right? You have other reports that have been hinting at this from various angles, but here we have very targeted, ideas that this group recommended. What is the hope from your end?
I think the hope is that we can, with some additional funding, Little commercial there. No, but we can work across a lot of different partners, as we did with the working group. We had over 20 folks from foundations, practitioners, university leaders, etc. We have to work together to really press on these levers. I think we know what the levers are now, and that's part of what that group was working on. What are the really key levers, and what's the low-hanging fruit too? Because you can't do everything at once, right? So how do you prioritize?
Yeah.
So I think the hope is that we can pull this group and others together to start to pull some of those levers.
Right.
And I can share what some of those are.
Yeah, because the low-hanging fruit you mentioned, right? So one of them, when you think about the federal level, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? Looking at what is exactly existing right now, the NIH T32, for example, that's something that we discussed quite a bit on there. And I know you've engaged a couple of T32 programs. Is that a good lever? Like, from your end, what is the potential there for that lever?
The potential there is that the T32 training grant already talks about the need for public-facing activity. It's quite general, but increasingly faculty are using it to expose grad students to public policy, to some aspects of civic science. I've been asked just over the last 6 months to, I think I've attended 3 T32 retreats to speak, as well as others.
Right.
So that's funding that already exists, which is really important because right now, federal funding for science is not going to grow very much, particularly NIH. We're in a sort of a deficit neutral path based on congressional agreements, and just the climate is such that we're not going to see big increases at NIH. We're going to be working towards those at Research America, and we're going to be making the case for them. But this is not the time, I think, that we want to try to add new NIH funding for public engagement. Let's use the funding that's there, okay, and let's provide tools for faculty who are sponsoring the T32 programs so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. Give them some examples of what their colleagues have done around the country.
Right. Working together, right?
Yeah, working together.
For this effort.
Yeah, and also, reaching out to NIH, the folks who, run the T32 program, and that program, spans the whole NIH, to make them aware too of what's happening at the grassroots level, and how they can help to support this. And then there are other agencies. NSF has a number of different programs that can be tapped for this, and we haven't even explored what like Department of Energy and other agencies might have through their already existing research grant programs.
In fact, they had a collaboration with the Kavli Foundation, right, to create SciPep.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And that they also published a report recently about communicating basic science and engaging scientists to do that. That brings me to my next question, because philanthropy was another aspect of these recommendations. There is a lot of activity there, right? And so how do we sustain that in the long term? Right? Because typically funding is not supposed to be so long term, right?
Right.
It's catalytic in nature.
Sure.
How, especially when you're thinking about institutionalizing civic science and public engagement, what more is needed? We get funding, right? Funding, people will throw that out there. We need more funding, but what else do we need?
We need universities. Well, I'd say the incentive structure right now is not set up really to foster civic science, right? And the promotion and tenure system, what's valued, generally is, and from your own process and being an administrator of a PhD program, it's about publishing. It's really not about going out into the community. But it's starting to change. Folks who are doing community-based participatory research, for example, which is more common probably in public health than in basic science. How do you incorporate that into a promotion and tenure system? But how can we reward faculty who are non-tenured, right, and seeking tenure, to be able to be rewarded for the time they're spending in developing and executing these programs and training their grad students, or giving their grad students opportunities away from the lab to undertake these activities.
Yeah. And there's been some research or reports that have come out of this. I think the APLU had a report on this, right, integrating public engagement into the promotion and tenure process, right? That I think probably would help with this culture, right? But the direction of travel, I want to go back to when I started this, right? The direction of travel. Are we headed there? What headwinds are there?
I think we are, because I think universities know that they don't poll all that well. And actually, what polls the best is often the research that they're doing, right?
Right.
A lot of universities have, offices where they do community engagement already. For the most part, they're not connected to their STEM departments, right? So we got to build some of these bridges. It's in universities' interests, right, to showcase the research that they're doing, and to showcase the people who are doing that research, and to invite people in, right? And again, it's really about meeting folks where they are. It's not about here's what you need to know, right? It's like, let's have a discussion. What are you concerned about? What interests you, right? So, really having that bilateral, discussion and form of communication. You could use a cliche like breaking down the walls, but that's a lot of what it is.
It could be that simple. You're talking about low-hanging fruits.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So I think it is starting to change. I participated in a program yesterday that Elsevier sponsored, and it really was about, a lot of it was about how research culture needs to change to impact, to have a greater impact on society. So a lot of folks are thinking about this.
Yeah. And I love the analogy of falling walls, right? In fact, there's a conference with that name.
Yes.
And there was a civic science meeting, if you will, or plenary, actually.
Yeah. Right.
Dietrich Schiffer was there, and we were talking about this promotion and tenure, and the walls are falling. But it is that potentially that simple. Like, how can we break down the walls within an institution to connect people who are doing this work?
Right, and how can we facilitate it? Because right now, it's not happening very fast, right? I mean, it needs to happen more quickly than it is happening.
So faster.
Right, because of the societal needs, because of the interests of young people, going into science. They're demanding this as well, right? We're seeing that, that demand through our Microgrant program and the new public engagement content program that the Lasker Foundation and now the Dana Foundation is helping us to support, where we put out a call for non-tenured faculty and grad students to develop content to help train their peers to engage in civic science. And we had no idea what the response would be. We got almost 60 applications.
And this is the first
first time we've ever done it. And you've read the applications with me, and there's some really fabulous ideas out there.
So again, engaging, connecting, and enabling people, right? Those who are in this space, connecting the dots. And I go back to that falling walls idea, right? And convening. So Research America is very good at this, right? Bring people together. The working group
Exactly.
Case in point, and
Yes.
much more, of course,
Yes.
right?
And I think if I could just say, part of what needs to happen is these things are going on in corners, right?
Yeah, right.
And you know that from the landscape project that you led, right? So we know that there are fellowships and workshops and even some 4-credit courses. It's very disparate, right? How do we share, or schools that are beginning to incorporate some of this into their incentive structure?
Right.
Not many, but a few. But how do we allow institutions to learn from each other, right? And I think that's really powerful, so that folks don't have to reinvent the wheel either, right? They're not starting from here, right? They're starting from here. Right. They still have to get institutional buy-in and institutional support, but they have a framework, right, that they can, that they're starting from.
Yeah. So more connection need to take place.
Yes.
Right? And I like
yes.
that
A
analogy,
lot more.
There's
more.
activity, but we're all kind of working on our little camps. And so that needs to change, right? We need more connection, especially now, right? Working alone, it's not that great. It's not as much fun when you collaborate with people, right? So what, I can just keep talking, Jenny. You and I keep chatting all day long.
We've had an incredible collaboration over the last couple of years.
I mean, and it's just been amazing because the space is just energizing.
It really is.
I mean, how's it been for you? Because you've been doing this for quite a bit of time, right?
I started out my career in my 20s as a community organizer, and I almost feel like that energy, is and then I spent, a lot of time on Capitol Hill and in the Clinton administration, and then did some work with industry, but that notion of how do you make change, right? The theory of change. Some of what we're doing really harkens back to what I did, the kind of work that I did in the 20s and in my 20s and what I learned from others, really, because, people are capable of really doing a lot if you give them the options, and we're not giving enough people options, right, to really explore science. And I know that the K through 12, science educators are really working hard at that. So, I mean, this is not a new thing. A lot of folks are working on that, but it's just exciting to see, the sparks happening, whether it's with graduate students or faculty or, in the communities that they're interacting with.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of sparks. Research America's Civic Engagement Microgrant Program is part of a broader ecosystem of funding that is fueling early-stage public engagement with science initiatives. This early-stage support provides the necessary catalytic funding for stakeholders to experiment with innovative engagement initiatives and gather the data needed to pursue growth-stage support to scale their ideas. Of course, not all initiatives are aiming to scale and grow. Regardless of the goals, the key is ensuring that the lessons being learned are captured across different mediums to inform future efforts and foster continuous improvement. There is still so much more to uncover in this rapidly evolving landscape. Join us next time as we continue our ongoing canvassing of the civic engagement funding ecosystem.